Hello and welcome to today's Putting into Practice VodCast, which is part of the Business Map programme that Hempsall is running for the Department for Education in spring 2021. Today's session is looking at what's changing and how we look at the issues around change in the Business Map webinar. I'm joined today by my colleague Jo Pringle. Me and Jo have both been providers in a variety of different roles, whether workers, managers or committee members. And we've spent a lot of time since supporting all types of early years and childcare providers with setting up, keeping going and supporting change management in early years and childcare, whether that be legislation, quality requirements, new nationally funded early years entitlements like 2-year-old funding and 30 hours, and a whole range of other things. We know it's a complex task managing early years and childcare. We know we all need to balance quality with parent and children's needs, funding, fee income, and our long-term business sustainability. So the Putting into Practice podcasts are around the whole programme of business support that we're delivering this term. But of course, nobody has managed early years and childcare before during a global pandemic. So everything has changed, need and demand, all sorts of considerations, and there's lots of uncertainty and anxiety around what that change means and what may happen next. So we've been spending a lot of time during the last year, Jo in particular, working with all types of provider, whether they be childminders, preschools, nurseries, children's centres or maintain nursery classes, to make sense of what's changing and to perhaps identify how we must and need to change in response. Nobody's done it before, but there's an awful lot of learning that we've all developed over the past weeks and months. And it's that learning that can inform our next and future directions. So Jo has developed the Business Map national webinars. They are running in January the 19th, 2021. At the end of today's podcast, we'll show you how you can book your place onto that free webinar. Jo's going to take us through some of the principles of what's changing and what we understand around it now. So, Jo, what has changed this year?
What hasn't changed? No, seriously, everything's changed. And it continues to change. But it's not all just about COVID. There are other issues that impact on family preferences, needs and demands. I suppose year on year, each year, businesses should be thinking about needs and demands and how the childcare needs of their community are changing. So there's a number of different things that we need to think about. Government support has provided a level of buoyancy within the labour market through the job retention scheme and the plethora, the many other things that have been out there. But I suppose it's important to recognise that whilst it's been extended, these things will come to an end. And we already are seeing in the news reports and research around, redundancies as potentially businesses change, some close, but others potentially will open. There'll be a different market. It's not all about just levels of employment, I don't think. It's also about the changes in the way that we work. During the first lockdown, non-essential workers were asked to work from home, and that's really reshaped and started to support people to rethink how they do things. Online meetings, virtual offices have become the norm for millions of people. And whilst some will move back to potentially blended models of people working within spaces or working sometime from home, actually there might be some parts of the employment market that actually never return back to the way that they work. There always has been, and there will continue to be changes in the way that we work. But also, as I said earlier, there'll be new employment opportunities. For example, through regeneration plans, through doing things differently, large retailers moving, lots of opportunities. So it's not all negative.
So what does that mean then in translating that into parental behaviours and preferences and demand, and how that might affect the early years and childcare market?
In the same way that the labour market, employment market, and those using childcare has always changed and responded to whether some of it is around the early years entitlements or different schemes. Parental preferences will always change and have always changed. We would have seen more families, potentially take more childcare when they became available, 30 hours became available, in the same way a new cohort of families who would never or might not have ever engaged in early education and childcare potentially engaged when the 2-year-old entitlement was introduced. So preferences are changing, and this table, which we'll explore in more detail at the webinar, is some of the things that providers have told us and local authorities have shared with us as well. We know that COVID has rapidly and dramatically changed parental preferences, some going bigger, some going smaller, some changing how they do things, and some have a level of anxiety that means that they're not returning or won't return quickly. The decisions that families make are unpredictable, and they will be fluid, and they will continue to be fluid for a little time. So it's hard to predict the longer term impact of parental demand on the market, because we don't know how quickly the employment part of it will return, how it will return, what it will look like, whether we will have blended models, whether families will return to doing part of the week where they want longer days. So the need for after school care, longer days, will be there, because to support recovery and to support economic recovery and growth, we will need those additional hours, those extended days, and the all year round provision again. But there are going to potentially be a reduction in some families for childcare. 2-parent households have during this time managed, and so we have seen potentially a change in and a reduction in what they need, because they've juggled how they manage it, working different parts of the day, maybe working an evening or fitting things in around a school day. But we've also seen things that have changed about ability to pay, because some families with reduced income, on furlough, haven't got the resource to be able to buy the additional things that they need. So as we move forward, it's important to think about all these things: changes in working patterns, working from home, families wanting more, how the market around you returns is going to be a really key action and piece of understanding that providers need to get a grip of.
I mean, I agree. I mean, I think, but also, we need to be careful that we test out our assumptions. I think sometimes people can imagine that demand will be lower, when in fact, actually, some of the changes to our families that we're working with might actually bring them into 30 hours eligibility, like they weren't there before. So that could increase demand for 30 hours in the same way that in similar ways that 2-year-old eligibility might go up or down. So it's those sorts of things that if parents are in industries that are booming, like supermarkets,
Absolutely.
online delivery, online fulfillment, those are clear examples of where the economy is doing well, then that could actually have a direct impact on increasing demand.
Absolutely. And also, as we start to move back into the workplace, blended models will mean that families need more. over a shorter space of time, not necessarily little bits for a long time. So we might see demand for for longer days, but less days, of which providers can put things together in a slightly different way to accommodate that, fill
Yeah.
in all their hours.
Yeah, and I think, we use the word flexibility a lot in this sector, but I think there could be hyper flexibility in that there may be a greater demand for frequently changing childcare needs. So it might be Tuesday, Wednesday after school on one week, but then Thursday, Friday the next. If people are having blended employment models and they're working from home and then going into work, of course, not everybody's able to work from home, but how those daily and weekly routines shift, change, and are juggled around to make things work.
Absolutely. And, ultimately, for some families, as we mentioned earlier, the ability to buy more and the desire to have, if they are having a funded place, it's in a pattern that works to reduce their costs as much as possible, is a consideration moving forward in the context of providers finding flexibility that it enables them to be sustainable longer term.
So you've got confidence up.
Absolutely. And I think, I have met so many providers who are working differently and I suppose, what's the word, inventively, to think about how they are supporting families to re-engage, to engage for the first time. The relationship for providers and families has changed. Who would have thought a year ago, we would be passing babies handover on the doorstep. So many things have changed. But the examples and the best practice and the good practice and the innovative practice that providers share around how they are doing things, how they are providing virtual consultations, providing virtual show rounds, and really thinking through where does their market now congregate and meet, and how do they reach them now in this new online
Mm.
virtual world that we're held in at the moment.
So how does the webinar support early years and childcare businesses to take action?
Our webinar will talk through and we'll go through the variety of different changes and all these things that we've just had a quick look through. But we'll also support providers to think about the other information that is out there that can be used, as well as a variety of tools to do this job. So understanding what's going on around them with regards to the market, the population, new housing, changes in employment are all key bits of the jigsaw to support them thinking about what are the opportunities for their business, what might they do differently, and what are, I suppose as important, what are the threats that potentially are going to impact on their business that they need to take some steps to mitigate moving forward. Some key information, hopefully what providers will leave, whether they are using the toolkit, attending the webinar, will be exploring how things are changing locally for them, thinking about how any changes that are going on around them might, because they're not necessarily going to, change parents' behaviours. Are they wanting different things? And then to take a reflective look to think about, are there things that we can change? Do we need to change? One of my mantras, if it's not broken, we don't need to fix it. But if we are seeing changes in demand, if our occupancy is lower, if parents are asking for different things, are there things that we can easily change and respond to? Might be adding a half an hour onto a day to extend a day slightly. And actually, what are the difficult things? What are the things that we might need additional support, or we might need to see what else is out there from whether that be from our local authority or other supports to assist them move forward?